Welcome to the Mets way, baby. Welcome back. We're going to start going live, doing these podcasts again, strictly Mets talk. You can catch me on the James Nolan podcast, where you can check out my articles at fansided.com/author/Jay Nolan, where I cover the Mets and the Yankees. And of course, I am going to do my best to convince the boys, Josh Shaw, Jared Levison, and Drew Michelle, to come back and join me on future podcasts. We're going to try to get the band back together, talking Mets, weekly pods, post games, all pre games, maybe even live updates, you name it. We're going to try to do it. But before we get in to the lot of Mets news, there's the biggest Met update of the week. A heartbreaking injury to some. Some people are happy it happened. Some people are ready to give Luis Acuna his opportunity to be an everyday player as the second baseman of the New York Mets. But I think we got to wait for that. So let's kick it off talking about that. I think we're going to get Brett Baty as the starting second baseman. If you haven't heard, Jeff McNeil will be out at least 3 to 4 weeks with a right oblique injury. So for not too long, he will be out. But I think the Mets are going to roll with Brett Baty. They've been playing him at second base the past 2 spring training games. But I'm not going to rule out Luis Acuna being on this roster. I wrote in my article yesterday that I think it would be better off for the Mets to platoon those 2 guys. Now, when you take a look, at their minor league numbers versus, Acuna's numbers against lefties, Baty's numbers against righties, it's very good. It's very intriguing. Now, I know it's the majors. It's completely different than AAA and AA, but, we got really no other option. I mean, the other option is Donovan Walton. He signed a minor league contract with the Mets. He can be that super utility guy for the Mets. It opens up the door for him to make this major league roster, because I think Brett Baty was going to crack the opening day roster regardless of this injury. But I don't think they should roll with Donovan Walton. I think they should see what they have in both these kids. I get Luis Acuna hasn't conquered AAA. He has struggled in AAA, matter of fact. And Brett Baty, on the other hand, he's already proven that he can kill AAA pitching. But at the same time, for the people that want to start Brett Baty and give him that everyday job and see what he can do, he's going to be playing the majority of the games. Because 4 out of 5 times, we're going to be facing a right-hander, at least 3 out of 5 times. So 3 out of 5 games, Brett Baty will be starting at second base if they did do that platoon option. And now Acuna, I think, it's only 2 weeks. For the people saying we don't want to lose Acuna, those reps in AAA, being an everyday player, but it's only 2 weeks. So if he struggles, you send him back down to AAA. But if he performs, then maybe you roll the dice with those 2 to platoon the whole entire year, or at least until they stink. And then when McNeil comes back and, he's that super utility guy, I think he would be better fit in that role if those 2 are actually raking. That's what you want to roll with. So let's talk about all the options. Let's get into Brett Baty first, why he might just get the everyday job. That case for Brett Baty to get the everyday job. He's already, like I said before, he's already conquered AAA pitching. He's raked in AAA for far too long. It's either MLB for him or bust at this point for Brett Baty. He's struggled through 3 seasons, but at the same time, he changed his approach. He looks a little bit more relaxed in spring training. He hit a nice double today, bounced off the wall. So he's hitting the crap out of the ball in spring training. Just looking at his numbers overall, Mets did win today. 2-1 victory over the St. Louis Cardinals. Soto with a nice homer. Soto's hitting 391 this spring training, which is insane. But Brett Baty's hitting 387. He's got a 457 on base percentage, a 677 slug percentage. He went 1 for 2 today with a double. So he continues his great spring training today, but he's got to do it in the regular season. Now, this is Brett Baty's opportunity to prove that he should be a part of this Mets team as a starter, because he will be that super utility guy if he struggles and McNeil comes back. And if he struggles within those first 2 weeks with that experiment to see if Baty can be that guy, well, then he's going to sit on the bench, and he might even get called back down to AAA at some point in the year if Luis Acuna is raking, and he'll get the call up. Rather, like if McNeil struggles and Baty struggle, and Acuna rakes in AAA, we're going to see Acuna at some point. So that's why it's pivotal for Baty to perform through these first 2 weeks. And then when McNeil comes back, Carlos Mendoza and David Stearns will have a very hard decision to make. So in the best case scenario, for Baty is he rakes. That's best case scenario. And it would work out for the team. Because if Baty does, have a breakout season, like we know he can do it. Like you look at Brett Baty's numbers in AAA, they are actually eye-popping. Not only AAA, across every level professionally, Brett Baty has raked outside of the most important level, obviously. And that level's the MLB. Let's take a look at his numbers in the minor leagues. So just last year, he got called down, obviously, because he struggled in his 50-game stint. But he went down to Syracuse, put up an 854 OPS with 16 home runs in just 62 games. And you look at his 2023 numbers in the minors. 2023 at AAA, he hit 298 with a 1013 OPS, 10 home runs, 31 RBIs in 26 games. Just 26 games he did that in. 2022, across AA and AAA combined, he hit 315 with a 943 OPS, 60 RBIs, and 19 home runs across 95 total games across those levels. So it's time for Baty to prove that he can be that guy at the major league level. And let's say he does become that guy. Well, that changes the entire complexion of the Mets. Because he'll join Mark Vientos, Pete Alonso, Francisco Lindor, Juan Soto, and yes, Brandon Nimmo, who we're going to talk about later, potentially starting the season as the DH, as impact players in this lineup. It would be huge if Brett Baty performs well through the first 2 weeks. Because then McNeil comes back and everybody would be happy because they wouldn't have to see Jeff McNeil much. Jeff McNeil would be that super utility guy rather than Baty. Now, here's option B. Option B is that platoon. I like the idea of the platoon because it kind of takes pressure off Brett Baty a little bit to only face right-handers, get that confidence up if he breaks off right-handers. And we also get to see if Acuna's, 14-game stretch last year was just a flash in the pan or if he could be an impact player. And now for anybody talking about because I saw somebody say that Luisangel Acuna sucked in AAA last year. It was 14 games. He was a flash in the pan. He's never going to be his brother. But nobody's asking him to be his brother, Ronald Acuna Jr. Nobody's asking him to be a top 10 player in MLB. I think what we should, want out of Luisangel Acuna is greatness, obviously. But what you expect is just a starting caliber player on an MLB team. If he can be that, that's huge. We don't need him to hit above 300 with over a 900 OPS like he did in those 14 games last year. So, and also the reason I'd put Acuna on this roster is one, I'd rather him over Donovan Walton. Donovan Walton's a left-handed bat. So Baty would have to face lefties, even if Donovan Walton's on this roster over Acuna. Whereas Acuna could platoon with him, and his defense up the middle is fantastic. You could plug him in late inning situations. Let's say a left-hander comes in relief. You slide in Acuna. You just slide in Acuna. Same thing if Acuna gets the start. If a right-hander comes in relief, we're probably going to be facing a lefty against the Houston Astros on opening day, who Clay Holmes is getting that opening day nod for the Mets, by the way. We'll talk about that soon. But having Acuna off the bench to come into the game against left-handers or vice versa, Baty off the bench to come in against right-handers, that would be a huge plus for the Mets. And it would allow the Mets to see, maybe if both these guys perform well, maybe you just platoon these guys for as long as they perform well. And then you have McNeil in your back pocket. Then you got McNeil in your back pocket. Now, option C is you roll out one of those two. And then when McNeil comes back in 1 to 2 weeks at the regular season, because he's only going to be out 2 weeks at most in the regular season, then you just slide him in, no matter what, no matter if they perform well or not, which I don't really like option C. Because if they perform well, I want to see whoever it is, Baty or Acuna, stay on that field until they get cold. Now, if they're cold and McNeil comes back and he's healthy, he's ready to go, then you just put McNeil in there. But I'd rather see what we got in both of them rather than one of them. I think it makes more sense because Baty isn't a fantastic defender at second base. Expecting a corner infielder, like the outfield is different. Being that super utility guy is different. Plugging him in at second for a few innings, plugging him in at third for a few innings where he's comfortable, plugging him in at first for, a game while Pete Alonso takes the DH spot Or even you plug him in left field with Nimmo being out. I could see that. But being the everyday second baseman when he's never done that before, that's asking a lot. So that's why I think we should have Acuna on the bench at the very least and then platooning with Baty. I think that would make the most sense. So now option D is, like I said, Baty gets that every day. Well, that was option A. Option D is, Brett Baty and Donovan Walton. I don't like the idea of Donovan Walton. He signed a minor league contract. He does have options, so he doesn't need to be on this team. But Walton last year hit 136. Hit 136 with San Francisco. Do we want that guy playing second base for us? Do we want that guy in the lineup? No. I'd rather Acuna be in the lineup because, in my opinion, Acuna is a much better player than Donovan Walton. Much better player. So, yeah, I'd rather see, that platoon. That's what I think they should do. What I think they're going to do, I think they're going to start Acuna in AAA. I think they're going to start Acuna in AAA. I think Brett Baty is going to get that opportunity to be that everyday second baseman for the first 2 weeks of the season. If he rakes, I think he'll stay in that lineup. They will find a spot for him. And if he underperforms, well, then you underperform for 2 weeks. And then we really know what Brett Baty is at this point in his career. He's a bench player. So this is really Brett Baty's opportunity to prove, that his minor league numbers are legit. Because it's do or die for Brett Baty. It really is do or die for Brett Baty. Last year, he got the opportunity, hit 229 to start the year, got sent down. Mark Vientos came up. Mark Vientos took that opportunity and ran with it. Well, now that's what we need Brett Baty to do. We need Brett Baty to do what Mark Vientos. We don't need him to hit 27 home runs. It would be great. It would be great. Don't get me wrong, but we don't need him to hit 27 home runs. 15 plus home runs out of Baty, that would be awesome. 280 plus batting average out of Baty, that would be awesome. But so far through 3 seasons, he's held a 215 batting average with a 607 OPS. At this point in his MLB career, he's not feared by any pitcher. Not feared by any pitcher. All right, now let's talk about Brandon Nimmo, and then we'll get into Clay Holmes, and then we'll end this. And then I got to convince the guys to hop on a pod with me sometime this weekend because that would be awesome if we can get the band back together. But Brandon Nimmo is going to be he's probably going to be DH. And let's be real, they're not going to rush him in left field. Now, there's a few drawbacks from that. Drawback number 1, Jesse Winker's defense in left field isn't great. He's got a cannon of an arm. His arm is great. He's accurate. He can throw runners out. Probably a better arm than Nimmo, but he doesn't cover as much ground, and he's just not better at tracking fly balls. So at this point in Jesse Winker's career, the best role for Jesse Winker is a DH, facing righties. And, I mentioned it in the article I put out today, not having those guys DH, the platoon of Marte and Winker will be tough because I think that platoon DH role for Winker and Marte, I think that's very intriguing. Like, Winker's only going to be facing righties if they DH, and Marte's only going to be facing lefties. So you take their last year's splits, Winker versus right-handers, Marte versus left-handers, and you combine them, and we had that across the whole entire 2024 season, this is what we would have gotten out of our DH, which is much better than what we got out of JD Martinez. So with those two last year platooning, we would have gotten a 276 batting average and an 806 OPS. That's really good. So that's a drawback for Nimmo potentially being the DH now, at least to start the year. So there's 2 drawbacks there. You got Jesse Winker in left, which his defense isn't great. And you take away that platoon DH, which I really think we could have gotten a lot of production. Now, the pro of Nimmo not being in left is at least we still get him in the lineup because Nimmo's numbers last year weren't great. They weren't great, but he still has a career 808 OPS. Still has a career 808 OPS. Well, actually 809 OPS. 1 point higher, whatever. But Nimmo in the 4-hole, it's not as bad as it sounds. You take a look at Nimmo's splits against, when they have runners on. Last year with runners on, Nimmo raked. Nimmo put up a 299 batting average with a 966 OPS and drove in 82 runs with runners on. So when runners are on base, which are probably going to be a lot of runners on base for Nimmo hitting in that 4-hole, I'm assuming he's going to produce at a high clip. Considering he has Pete Alonso, Juan Soto, and Francisco Lindor hidden in front of him, I think Nimmo could surpass his career high last year with 90 RBIs. Like I said, with runners on base, 299 batting average last year with a 966 OPS and 82 runs. So that's, it's obvious it's easier to get RBIs when runners are on, but that's without runners. That's just not without runners in scoring. That's not just with runners in scoring position. That's with a runner at first. So Nimmo with runners on, he can do his damage. He did his damage last year. He was clutch last year. Even though he struggled, even though he hit in the 220s, he was clutch. And I think Brandon Nimmo will have a better year than he did last year, because it's not like he's declining. And I'm going to get into Pete Alonso too. Pete Alonso isn't declining either. He had 2 bad years. Declining is not catching up to the fastball like JD Martinez did last year. Declining is getting old. These guys aren't old. Brandon Nimmo's only 31. Pete Alonso's only 30. They both just had bad years last year. That's what it was. Last year he hit 224, still hit 23 home runs, drove in 90 runs, career high, but he only had a 727 OPS with that 224 batting average. But you look at 2020, like from 2020 to 2023, Nimmo was a top 3 hitter on this team. He had an 828 OPS across those 2020, 2021, 22, and 23. So 4-year stretch, 828 OPS, way above league average. 278 batting average. One of the most consistent hitters on the Mets since 2020. He put up 56 home runs, so that's about 14 per year, 20 per 162 games, and then 178 RBIs. So if Nimmo can get back to getting on base a lot and still keep his power that he showed us in the last 2 years, we're going to get probably the best season out of Brandon Nimmo of his entire career. So I'm excited to see Nimmo in this 4-hole because, like I said, hitting 299 with runners on last year, driving in 82 runs. And considering now you have Alonso, Soto, and Lindor hidden in front of him, I think he could produce at a high clip this year. I really do. So keeping him in the lineup is huge. But it definitely is a concern because now, like I said, you got Winker in left field who isn't great defensively. And that platoon of Marte and Winker, we lose that now. And we would have gotten over a 270 batting average and over an 800 OPS last year if they did platoon the whole entire year. So I think we would have gotten a really good platoon DH role for those two. All right. Off to Brandon Nimmo. Let's take a look at Pete Alonso and why I don't think he's declining. Because like I said, with Nimmo, it's not like Pete Alonso's not catching up to the fastball. That's not ever. And he's in the best shape of his entire career. I'm not sure if anybody has taken a look at Pete Alonso this spring training, but he's in insane shape. He looks like he put on muscle. He looks like he lost a lot of fat. He looks like he's toned. So I'm excited to see, Pete Alonso play in the best shape of his career. And he's going to play. He hasn't taken a single at-bat in his 30s. He hasn't. Last year hit 240, 788 OPS, 88 RBIs, 34 home runs. That's his worst year. Think about that. His worst year, he still had a 788 OPS and hit over 30 bombs. Now, Pete Alonso, I think this is his floor, hitting 217 like he did in 2023, but he still had an 821 OPS, still drove in 118 runs, and still hit 46 home runs. If we get that Pete Alonso, that's perfect for this lineup. Having a 40 home run hitter in this lineup that's not Juan Soto would be huge. Now, can we get back to the 2022 Pete Alonso? That would be enormous for this team because then we'd have 3 MVP caliber players in the lineup. He finished top 8 in MVP in 2022. He hit 271, had an 869 OPS, led the league with 131 RBIs, and had 40 home runs. Can we get that Pete Alonso? I'm not sure, but if he's a shade of what he was in 2022, which is not too long ago, and like I said, he hasn't declined. He just had 2 bad years. He still can catch up to that fastball. If he wasn't catching up to fastballs, I'd say, you know what, I'm worried. I'm really worried about Pete Alonso. But one, that's not an issue for him. His bat speed hasn't declined. His exit velocity has not declined. He still hits the ball hard when he makes contact. What Pete Alonso struggled with the past 2 years is pitch selection. That's all it was. And I think he's going to get better pitches to hit with Juan Soto hitting in front of him, with Lindor hitting in front of him. Because if Lindor and Soto are on base, he's going to see fastballs. He's going to see good pitches. He's going to see pitches in the strike zone. Because with runners on, it's common sense. You know, you don't want to walk a guy. You don't want to extend that in. You want to get out of that jam. You want to get a double play. So, Pete Alonso he did ground out into a lot of double plays last year. Don't get me wrong. But I think it was just a case of bad luck. I think it was a bad year out of him. And he raked in the postseason. I mean, outside of Mark Vientos, you can even make a case that Pete Alonso had the best postseason on the Mets, but I think it was Mark Vientos. But Pete Alonso in the postseason last year, and even in the wild card round, the one wild card game we had in 2022, he hit that clutch home run. You know, he was clutch. He hit 300 that playoff round with an OPS of 1.017. But last year in the playoffs, he went off. He had 4 home runs, 10 RBIs, hit 273 at a 999 OPS. So when you look at his playoff numbers, they're actually really good. A 1.003 OPS, a 278 batting average. He's got 5 home runs and 11 RBIs in 16 playoff games. So you could say Pete Alonso isn't clutch. You could say Pete Alonso isn't declining. But that would be dead wrong. Pete Alonso isn't declining. He can catch up to the fastball still. It's just pitch selection. That's his problem over the past 2 years. And if he improves that, I think we're going to get a good Pete Alonso. And like I said, he looks like he's in the best shape of his career. That's the best part about this Pete Alonso year. And he just seems more relaxed. Pete Alonso seems a lot more relaxed. You know, when you look at his spring training numbers, he's hitting the ball well. He is hitting the ball well. Let's take a look at Pete Alonso's spring training numbers. So right now, Pete Alonso is hitting 276, 382 on base percentage, 414 slug percentage. Still hasn't hit a home run. But we all know Pete Alonso. Those home runs will come. But he hasn't striking out a lot. Let's look at his strikeouts in each game. March 3rd against Miami, didn't strike out. March 6th against Houston, struck out twice against Washington. March 9th against Washington, though, played him again, no strikeouts. Against St. Louis, didn't strike out. Another game against St. Louis on March 12th, didn't strike out. Against Boston yesterday, struck out once. So he's got 5 strikeouts in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 games. Only 5 strikeouts. That's pretty good for Pete Alonso. That's pretty good for Pete. Now we just got to see those home runs come. He'll be motivated. He's probably going to want to opt out. He's still getting that $30 million, so he's going to be more relaxed. At least he's getting paid, highest paid third baseman right now in all of baseball. I'm expecting a big year from Pete. All right, last thing I want to talk about, Clay Holmes, baby, getting the opening day nod. Shout out to Keith O'Shea and Sons. He was he was the first guy I saw really saying that, whoa, you look at Clay Holmes' numbers, he could be a starter. Like, what if he's one of those relievers that you turn into a starter? Like Michael King, like Seth Lugo. Like, there's a lot of relievers last year who turned into starters, and they had really good years. So it's not rare to turn a reliever into a starter in today's MLB. You can sign him for a really good deal. Like, if Clay Holmes pitches to a sub 3.5 ERA, which he has, his career ERA is sub 3.5. He had a 2.68 ERA in his 4 seasons with the Yankees. So if we can get a sub 3.5 ERA, a 3-year deal, $38 million, that's a steal. That's a steal for starting pitchers, especially when you take into account the money that starting pitchers are getting today. Like Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander just got $16 million each. And they're at the tail end of their careers. So Keith was really the first guy that I saw saying, hey, maybe someone should turn Clay Holmes into a starter. And luckily, it was the Mets. And he's done so good this spring training. 9.2 innings, 13 strikeouts, hasn't allowed a single run. Clay Holmes has looked fantastic. He added a new pitch to his arsenal, a kick change, which has looked great. His sinker, he's been relying on his whole entire career. It's a great pitch. He's got a cutter, a four-seamer that both touch the upper 90s. He's got a good sweeper, and he's got a good slider. So he's got 6 different pitches. He's one of the best ground ball pitchers in the game, if not the best. Last year, he had the best ground ball rate, bad ball profile. You can look at it on Baseball Savant. He generated 64.6% of ground balls on batted balls last year. So Holmes is a ground ball pitcher. He's a ground ball pitcher. He has the makeup to be a great starter. And I think it was kind of cool to see him named as the opening day starter. And if Clay Holmes can do what he's doing in spring training, I'm not expecting him to be Jacob deGrom like he is pitching. He's literally pitching like Jacob deGrom in spring training right now. I don't expect him to do that in the regular season. Like I said, a sub 3.5 ERA would be great. But let's say Clay Holmes is a sub 3 ERA guy or even a sub 3.2 ERA guy. If he is an elite pitcher or a front end starter, if he proves he can be a front end starter, when Sean Manaea comes back and Brandon Sproat eventually gets called up, we're going to have one of the top rotations in MLB. So David Stearns knows what he's doing. So let's play that. Let's play the what if game. What if Holmes becomes a front end starter? What if Brandon Sproat dominates in AAA and gets the call within, let's say, by mid-May, June? Well, we're talking a rotation in June with Kodai Senga, who in my opinion can be an ace, had a 2.98 ERA, which was fifth in all of MLB in 2023, was an NL All-Star, had over 200 Ks, was top 5 in strikeout per 9 innings. Number 2, Sean Manaea. We all know we expected Sean Manaea to be the opening day guy this year because of the season he had last year. David Peterson, who pitched to a 2.90 ERA. We'll have Clay Holmes, and that's the what if. And then Brandon Sproat. Those would be your first 5 starters. And then your number 6, you could roll with Tyler McGill, Griffin Cannon, Paul Blackburn, whoever's pitching well in their, they're getting their shots probably on the opening day roster. Whichever 3 of those guys is pitching the best, then you got them. And even those 3 guys at the back end of the rotation with this lineup is going to score more than 4 or 5 runs a game. If those guys have low 4 ERAs, which is not asking much out of those 3 guys, they allow a low 4 ERA basically means you allow 3 to 4 runs across 5-6 innings. If they do that, the Mets will win more games than they lose. So Clay Holmes has the opportunity. He can be that guy that changes the entire narrative around this Mets rotation. And boy, am I excited for it. Clay Holmes, congratulations, man. Getting the opening day nod. I'm pumped for it. I'm ready for this season to start. We're just 2 weeks away from opening day. 2 weeks away. Less than 2 weeks, I believe. But yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be fun. The most anticipated season, the most anticipated Mets opening day, probably since, I'd say, 2016. This is the most anticipated opening day since 2016. And we're giving the ball to Clay Holmes. And if he performs well on opening day, we're going to be excited. We're going to be excited. Also, shout out to Juan Soto, raking 4 home runs and 23 at-bats so far in spring training. That's hard to do. I get it's spring training, but, we all know Juan Soto's going to have a great year. Let's be real. He's actually the favorite to win the NL MVP this year over Shohei Ohtani, which is insane to think about. All right. That's the Mets way. That's it for today. I'm going to try to get Josh. I'm going to try to get Drew. I'm going to try to get Jared back on these pods. Get the four horsemen back on the Mets way. All right. That's it for tonight, guys. Thank you for watching. And let's go Mets.